Hi there, Praggies. Welcome back to another episode where we are talking about what is going on the ground in the city of Chicago, the city where I live, and I'm lucky to be involved in what I think is some of the most effective resistance that we have seen to the Trump administration. This is perversely going to be an episode where the answer to what's keeping me hopeful is very easy to give. And that's crazy to say as someone, when we logged in this morning, Tiara greeted me by asking, what is it like to be living in a city under siege, right? And I think that varies depending on the city under siege, but in the city of Chicago, I think it is extremely energized and extremely hopeful. And Tiara and I have not yet debriefed what's going on the ground because we thought that instead of doing that and then filming, it might be for the best to bring y'all with us as we go about debriefing what my experience has been as a Chicagoan over the last week or so, as Donald Trump has threatened to send the Department of War into the city, as ICE enforcement has ramped up. There are festivals that are being canceled for Mexican Independence Day. And the city is, I think, really effectively fighting back and making clear we do not want the president here.
Before we get started, I really want to just know, and that question is just so important because I think as we continue to see this government and this administration exert authority in cities, democratic cities, not every city, and not every city with increasingly high crime rates, we're going to see a disparity in Democratic-led states and Democratic-led cities where more and more citizens will experience what it is like to be in a city under siege for the government. And these are not things that we should take lightly. And I was listening to Governor Pritzker, who said, I refuse to pretend any of this is normal. And we've come to see the headlines. It has been the blitzkrieg of the flood the zone that has also prevented people. It's happened in DC. We also got last week a court order saying that the deployment of federal troops or the National Guard in LA was illegal. And so we now have more cities and we have more instances where the justice system is on the sides of these cities, but we haven't seen a stop to either the proposals like going to Chicago, Baltimore, DC, which has a completely different makeup, and then also proposals for cities like Boston. So what should we be paying attention to, and what is it really like on the ground for that organizing work in some of America's largest?
I'm very excited to get to talk to you. Y'all can probably tell I'm so excited to get to share these things with you. And I think as soon as Tiara and I finish recording this episode, we'll be recording a second one that has very tangible action steps for what you can do in your own city to set up things like rapid response networks to plug in. I think broadly, what it's been like in Chicago specifically feels different because a feeling that I've been having over the course of the last 2 or so weeks is it's the sentiment of, oh my God, our leaders are handling this exactly how I hope they will, right? And that is something that I have not felt the entirety of Trump 2.0. And I'm not saying that there have been no effective leaders. There have been many effective messengers. We've talked about on here, I think that Gavin Newsom responded relatively well to the National Guard being deployed. But we've also said on here, I am a JB Pritzker stan until the day that I die. I apologize to everyone for being on board with a billionaire and there are no perfect politicians and all of these other things. But I think that JB Pritzker and Brandon Johnson, who is a mayor who is a former public school teacher, who lives for and has for a long time in Austin, which is a predominantly Black neighborhood in the southwest side of Chicago, takes public transit everywhere. There's a picture of him, I believe, the day after he made it to Chicago has a 2-round, top 2, make it to the runoff kind of primary, like New York does. Many of us followed that election. Taking the transit, the day after he had very unexpectedly, because he was one of the furthest left candidates, made it to the second round of the mayoral election. Brandon Johnson was Zohran Mamdani before Zohran Mamdani was in the national consciousness. And there are some differences. And Brandon has not been a perfect mayor. Again, I don't stand politicians beyond, I don't believe there are perfect politicians, but I do really, really support. And last time I think I used slang like Stan. I think we got some questions about what it means. It just means I'm a very big fan of it's from an Eminem song, of both Mayor Johnson and Governor Pritzker. And I think that what we're seeing is that it not only energizes the people that live in your city or state when you stand up to the Trump administration, but that if you stand up to the Trump administration proactively and you say before the guard is there, keep out, we don't want you here, he's really kind of backing down. And I recognize that we have a different positioning than LA did, for example, because we have the massive benefit of Governor Newsom having filed that lawsuit that now makes it such that if Donald Trump sends in or federalizes the National Guard in response to Chicago protests until that suit is litigated, that is functionally a declaration of civil war, and not in a oh, he's tweeting about it way, in a very real, tangible soldiers on the ground way. And so something else that I think that we've seen Chicago do really effectively is there was a massive mobilization on Saturday in the city. And that was planned by a coalition called Hands Off Chicago, who I really recommend people follow on Instagram. Their handle is handsoff_Chicago. And that's a coalition of labor groups, of abortion rights groups, of immigrants' rights groups, organizing against the invasion of the city, the threatened invasion of the city. And they had been advertising for at least a week or two. There's going to be a rapid response the day that Trump orders the National Guard into the city. There's going to be a rapid response at this place, at this time, the day that Donald Trump orders the National Guard into the city. If it happens before 3 p.m., the action is the same day. If it happens after, it's a different day. Like, be ready. And that had been circulating for a week or two. And then Donald Trump has some National Guards people at the naval base. He's tweeting about the National Guard. He's saying he's going to deploy them. I have, as many of y'all are aware, been saying he isn't going to do that because it would be a civil war. And I'm not saying he doesn't have appetite, but he could just wait a couple of weeks for the Supreme Court to tell him he can do whatever he wants. But this is a playbook that we've seen over and over again in the Trump administration, is the kind of confusion. Is he defying a judge's order? Is Alina Habba illegally operating as like U.S. attorney? Is someone duly appointed? Is a judge? And I think that a lot of the organizing that we've seen has been set up to say, well, when this line is crossed, we're going to act. And then Donald Trump comes up to the line and like it's very elementary school where he like sticks his tongue out across the line. You're like, well, I'm not across the line. Now I'm across the line. Now I'm not across the line. I've not been. And people don't know what to do. And so what Chicago did is they said, you know what? Fuck this. The National Guard, we don't know. Does it count if they're deployed at the naval base? We don't care. The feds are in our city. There's been ICE enforcement ramped up, and there's been direction. There's going to be ICE enforcement ramped up. And at the end of the day, whether or not the National Guard is activated doesn't really make a difference in terms of whether or not we are occupied when Donald Trump is saying, hey, I want to occupy you guys, and then sending however many ICE agents to come disappear neighbors off the streets, as well as just generally harass Black and brown people. And so thousands of people showed up to this rapid response action that was announced less than 24 hours before. I've seen some reports saying 10,000. I've seen some reports saying like 7 to 8, but very close to 5 figures, if not quite there. I was happy to be able to be present myself. And people took to the streets. And again, I've also seen some discourse on the internet where it's like, and the cops were standing with protesters. They were not. The policing is, the police are not going to come protest with you. I hate to say it. But I do think that it showed Brandon Johnson has been very clear with the police that they are not to assist ICE enforcement, that they are not to disrupt peaceful protest. And so we're also, again, seeing the real power of leadership in saying, this is not a riot. This is a beautiful city. I think that we've seen a lot of mistakes from Democratic mayors in particular, talking about, oh, the crime is bad here. And we welcome, we're going to make sure that no protesters are doing anything violent. And I think that Pritzker and Johnson refuse to accept that premise and are like, y'all are the violent ones, and we will not be. And this is a fantastic city with fantastic people who are standing up for their neighbors, and we're not going to get in their way.
Well, Rachel, before we wrap up, because I know we have another video that we want to get really into the nitty gritty of what people can do if you're in Chicago, if you're not in Chicago. But one of the other things that I wanted to highlight from what Governor Pritzker has said, and he is really raising the alarm. And I haven't gone to the local level too much to see what Mayor Johnson is saying, but there's so much going on across the country. But I really do want to highlight so many voices. But I think one of the most salient and important things that's probably not getting enough coverage, because we know how media works, which is another thing that I want to pivot to in our next conversation, is how can people get more information? But when Governor Pritzker says, one thing I don't want us to get comfortable with is that once we see these atrocities as normal, what comes next for American citizens? So what is the value of staying in tune with not just what's happening in LA and DC and Chicago, but the larger national context about how no one knows the law right now. There is a gross government overreach and probably illegally defying court orders. What is the value of us as general citizens paying attention? And what truly are the dangers if a place like Chicago didn't have all of this prepared? And if people aren't tuning in to continue to quote the 3.5 rule that Erica Chenoweth has come up with, what amount of 10,000 people, 7,000 people, 20,000 people mobilizing in a city during this important moment in American history does that show for other people and show for the state of our democracy?
I think that Governor Pritzker is exactly right to be naming what comes next. And I think he's been doing an excellent job of that throughout this presidency. I think that he was the first, maybe the only Democratic mayor until cities started getting invaded to name what was happening as authoritarianism and to very publicly say, we're not practicing appeasement. Like, if you come here and try to take over, tough. we're here. And I think that we've now seen, I think Wes Moore in Maryland and Brandon Scott in Baltimore, who's the mayor, I think they've been doing a really great job with this rhetoric. I have a lot of issues with how Mayor Bowser in DC has been doing that, understanding that she is in a difficult situation given that DC is not a state. But I think that Kaya Chatterjee, who has been running Free DC, has exactly the right tone. One of many organizers, but a very public-facing organizer of Free DC, has been messaging this very effectively, that this is fascist authoritarianism. And just to name many, many predominantly Black activists, including Brandon Johnson, have been naming that policing as it exists and existed prior to Donald Trump in the United States is already quite fascist, extremely disproportionately enforced against Black people in this country, various like low-level laws and everything else. And so again, had been saying, if you allow this type of fascism, you are building a structure for what comes next, and are now being proven right. And so I think that we should really listen to them, the people that have been saying this for a long time, when they say, if you continue to allow this kind of fascism and authoritarianism now in the United States by someone who is bosom buds with literal white supremacists left and right, if not one himself, what comes next is violent, and what's already happening is violent disappearances and deportations, but the number of groups that's going to happen to is going to continue to expand. There's infrastructure being built out to do the same thing to trans people. There's a huge emphasis on increasing the death penalty in the United States, specifically aimed at migrants, but also that always has been disproportionately enforced against particularly people who who harm white victims and Black people broadly. And so I think that what comes next is exactly what you think. And so to hear some elected officials not only acknowledging that, but really acting then in the way that one might expect an elected official to act when you know what comes next based off history, is really what's keeping me hopeful today. And we're going to get into the nitty gritty of how to plug in Chicago, or what that looks like in Chicago, as well as how other cities can be effectively preparing in our next video. So I hope that you like, subscribe, follow along to Legal AF over here on the Midas Touch Network, and follow along with Tiara and myself on personal social medias. Especially, I've been able to write some stuff up on Substack about this Chicago experience, and I really hope to continue to do that because I think that we're getting to learn from activists in LA and DC. And I think that Chicagoans take our responsibility of kind of showing up for the whole country in this way very seriously. We're proud of our city. I love the city of Chicago, and I'm frankly excited for everybody nationwide to see just how liberatory and organized and joyful this city is. So see you in a second.
Can't get your fill of Legal AF? Me neither. That's why we formed the Legal AF Substack. Every time we mention something in a hot take, whether it's a court filing or a oral argument, come over to the Substack. You'll find the court filing and the oral argument there, including a daily roundup that I do called, wait for it, Morning AF. What else? All the other contributors from Legal AF are there as well. We got some new reporting. We got interviews. We got ad-free versions of the podcast and hot takes. Where? Legal AF on Substack. Come over now to free subscribe.